There is a moment in the middle of a storm when the most dangerous thing you can do is move. I have watched men lose everything, not because the storm was too strong, but because they could not be still. They confused movement with progress. They confused noise with strategy. They confused action with wisdom. And the market, which is nothing more than a mirror of human psychology, punished them for it. Not harshly, not dramatically, quietly. The way nature always punishes impatience, slowly, completely, without apology. I have been investing long enough to know that the most important decisions I ever made were not the ones where I acted. They were the ones where I chose not to. That is where most people misunderstand what this game actually is. They think wealth is built in moments of boldness, in grand declarations, in public moves and celebrated bets. They watch someone ring a bell on a trading floor and they think that is what success looks like. But that bell rings for everyone, including the ones who are quietly walking out the other door with everything the celebrating crowd just handed them. The market is not a place where the loudest voice wins. It is a place where the quietest mind survives long enough to win by default. I learned this not from a book. I learned it from watching people far smarter than me destroy themselves with their own mouths. Brilliant people. People who could read a balance sheet better than almost anyone alive. People who understood business at a level most will never reach. And yet they talked too much. They revealed too soon. They celebrated too early. And the information they gave away freely became the weapon that someone else used against them. Information is the only currency that loses its value the moment you spend it. Think about that slowly. When you tell someone what you no longer have an advantage. You have a conversation. And conversations are expensive when the other person is paying attention for the wrong reasons. I have sat across tables from people who smiled while they were calculating. People who asked questions that felt like curiosity but were really reconnaissance. People who complimented my thinking while quietly filing it away to use against me later. Not because they were evil, because that is how this works. That is the nature of any competitive environment. Information flows toward the person who knows how to receive it without giving anything back. This is the first thing I understood about the silent game. You do not protect your wealth by hiding it. You protect it by never letting anyone accurately measure it. There is a profound psychological principle at work here that most people underestimate. When people do not know your number, they cannot calculate their relationship to it. They cannot feel threatened by it. They cannot envy it precisely. And envy, I have come to believe, is one of the most destructive forces in a wealthy person's life. Not because it is morally complicated, but because it changes how people behave around you. It changes what they offer you. It changes what they withhold. It changes who enters your life and for what purpose. A man who knows your exact net worth will always, always treat you as a number first and a person second. I have seen families destroyed by this. I have seen friendships that were genuine become transactional the moment a number became known. Not because the friend changed, but because knowledge changed the relationship. The friend could not unknow it, could not unsee the gap between your life and theirs. And that gap, even if they never spoke of it, became a silent presence at every table you shared together. So I made a rule, early. Not a formal rule, a way of being. I decided that no one outside a very small circle of necessary people would ever know a precise number. Not approximately, not by implication, not through lifestyle signals. I would live in a way that made me difficult to measure. This is not dishonesty. This is discipline. The oak tree does not announce how deep its roots go. It simply stands through the storms that knock down everything planted carelessly. I call what I practice the shadow discipline. And it is not something I invented. It is something I observed in every truly durable form of wealth I have ever encountered. The people who last, not for one generation, but across time, they all share one quality. They are very difficult to see clearly. Not because they hide, because they understand that visibility is a liability when the wrong people are watching, and the wrong people are always watching. This is the dark truth that optimists struggle to accept. Human beings are not naturally supportive of other people's success. They try to be. they want to be. But beneath the congratulations, beneath the genuine warmth that exists in most relationships, there is a subconscious ledger being kept, a quiet accounting of who has more and who has less, who is rising and who is standing still. And when that ledger tips too far in one direction, something shifts in people, something they may not even be aware of. They begin to want you to stumble, not consciously, not cruelly. But somewhere in the architecture of their psychology, a small voice begins to hope for correction, for balance, for the world to redistribute what feels unfair to them. I am not saying this to make you distrust everyone. I am saying it because understanding this protects you from expecting things from people that human nature does not allow them to give. The mistake is not in having successful relationships. The mistake is in expecting those relationships to be immune to the psychology of comparison. So the second piece of the shadow discipline is this. You never announce your next move. Not because secrecy is romantic, because the announcement itself changes the outcome. I have made this mistake. Early in my career, before I understood what I am telling you now, I spoke about a position before it was complete. I shared my thinking with someone I trusted, and I watched, with education rather than bitterness, as that information rippled outward in ways I could not control. Not through malice, through the entirely human impulse to share interesting things. And by the time that ripple returned to me, the opportunity had changed, the price had moved, the edge was gone, the announcement had consumed the advantage. There is a reason the best chess players do not explain their strategy mid-game. Not because they are rude, because explanation is distraction, and distraction costs games that patience would have won. Every time you announce a plan before it is complete, you are inviting the world to have an opinion about it. And opinions, even well-meaning ones, create pressure. Pressure to defend, pressure to accelerate, pressure to prove. And none of those pressures exist in the original calculation you made alone, in silence, when the thinking was clean. Let the result speak, never the intention. This extends far beyond investing. It applies to business, to personal decisions, to any area of life where execution matters more than recognition. The person who tells you what they are about to build is not building yet. They are performing the idea of building, and performance, however satisfying in the moment, is not construction. Build first. Be seen only when the structure is already standing. The third principle of the shadow discipline is the one people find hardest to accept because it runs against every instinct toward fairness and transparency. Never share your edge, not with partners, not with friends, not with people you admire, not even with people who have been generous to you. I understand how that sounds. It sounds cold. It sounds like the reasoning of someone who has confused strategy with selfishness. But let me explain what I actually mean, because the distinction matters. Sharing knowledge is not the same as sharing edge. Knowledge is understanding how something works. Edge is understanding something about how something works that other people do not yet understand. The moment that second thing becomes known to others, it ceases to be an edge. It becomes knowledge. And knowledge, while valuable, does not produce the returns that edge produces. Every investor I have ever known who consistently outperformed over long periods of time had one thing in common. They protected their process, not their conclusions, not their positions necessarily. Their process, the way they thought, the framework through which they evaluated things, because the framework is where the edge lives. And a framework shared becomes a framework competed against. I have given away ideas freely throughout my life, ideas I had already fully harvested, ideas where the window had closed. That kind of generosity costs nothing and often returns goodwill that has its own value. But the living edge, the active thinking that is currently producing results that I have never given away, not once, and I never will. There is a forest in this world, and some trees cast wider shadows than others. The shadow is where the tree does its most important growing, protected from too much exposure, quiet, unhurried. Let others argue in the sunlight. Let the work happen in the shade. Now I want to speak about something more personal, something that touches not strategy, but character. Because the shadow discipline is not only about protecting wealth from competitors, it is about protecting the people closest to you from wealth itself. There is a particular cruelty in giving a child the answer before they have learned to ask the question. I have watched second-generation wealth fail with a consistency that would be statistically remarkable if it were not so psychologically predictable. Not because the children were foolish, not because they lacked intelligence or even ambition, but because they were raised inside the answer. They never experienced the specific hunger that produces the specific discipline that produces the specific results that created the wealth they inherited. And so, when the wealth arrived, guaranteed, not earned, it arrived without the operating system needed to sustain it. Money without the psychology that created it is not an inheritance. It is a slow dissolving. I made a decision long ago that the greatest gift I could give the people I love was not a guaranteed outcome. It was an earned capability. The ability to generate, the ability to recover, the ability to evaluate clearly when the world is telling them to panic. These things cannot be transferred through a document. They can only be built through experience, through the specific texture of uncertainty, through the education that only genuine stakes can provide. This is not withholding. This is the deepest form of preparation I know. A child who knows they will inherit everything has already lost the most important competition, the one against their own potential. And then there is the last principle, the one that governs how I move in public, which is to say, as little as possible, with as little signal as possible. I have never understood the impulse to broadcast charity, to announce difficulty, to share the personal victories that mean the most. Charity announced is not charity. It is marketing with a philanthropic aesthetic. The act itself is real, but the announcement transforms it. It moves the motivation from giving to being seen giving. And those are not the same thing. One is virtue, the other is a transaction where the currency is perception. I give. I have always given. But the giving that matters most to me has no audience. It requires none. The impact is the point, not the image of the impact. And personal pain, the real kind, the kind that changes you, that belongs to an even smaller circle. Sharing it publicly does two things, neither of them serving you. It invites people into a vulnerability that most of them do not know how to hold with care. And it trains you to process emotion through external validation rather than internal resolution. Both of those outcomes weaken you in ways that compound over time. There are things I have been through that no one outside my family knows. Not because I am ashamed, because they are mine. Because the privacy of them is part of their integrity. The world has a way of cheapening whatever it is allowed to touch too freely. So I keep the most important things close. Not hidden, close. Let me bring this back to where I began. The storm, the stillness, the dangerous impulse to move when the most strategic thing is to remain, when markets feel extreme, when fear is loudest, when the crowd is most certain in either direction, when the noise is overwhelming and everyone around you seems to know exactly what is about to happen. That is precisely the moment when the shadow discipline matters most. Because extreme markets are not primarily financial events. They are psychological ones. The prices on a screen are simply the averaged output of millions of human emotional states colliding simultaneously. Fear and greed made numerical. And understanding that, really understanding that at the level where it changes your behavior, is worth more than any model or forecast. I do not try to predict what markets will do. I try to predict what people will do. And people under extreme conditions are remarkably predictable. They sell what they should hold. They buy what they should avoid. They seek comfort when they should be seeking clarity. They look for consensus when the consensus is always most wrong at exactly the moments it feels most right. My strategy, when things feel extreme, is not a trading strategy. It is a silent strategy. I become quieter. I make fewer calls. I share less. I observe more. I let the noise move through me without landing. And then, when the people who were loudest have exhausted themselves, when the certainty has burned itself out, I look again, slowly, carefully, without urgency. Because the best opportunities I have ever found were sitting quietly in the space the crowd had just abandoned in panic. The market rewards patience so disproportionately that it should be taught as the primary skill of investing. Everything else, analysis, valuation, strategy, is secondary to the ability to wait without being consumed by waiting. And this is where the shadow discipline becomes not just a philosophy about wealth, but a philosophy about living. The person who can sit with uncertainty without performing certainty for an audience is rare. The person who can hold a position, financial or otherwise, without needing external confirmation of its validity is rarer still. The person who can be underestimated, quietly, for years, and feel no urgent need to correct that misperception, that person has an advantage that cannot be copied, because it is not a strategy. It is a character. I have been underestimated many times. I have been in rooms where people spoke as though I were not the most informed person there. I have been excluded from conversations and opportunities by people who had not done the work of understanding what I actually knew. And in every one of those situations, I made the same choice. I let them be wrong about me. Not because it did not sting occasionally, but because correcting them would have cost me something more valuable than their revised opinion. It would have cost me the advantage of their underestimation. A predator in tall grass does not stand up to remind the field who it is. It waits. And the waiting is the strategy. The quiet ones are not quiet because they have nothing to say. They are quiet because they understand what silence is actually worth. And in a world that has never been louder, that understanding is the rarest and most durable edge I know.